All right, let's talk about this round table. As I say, the Kabuki Theatre, they've already, I mean, literally, when they're briefing to the Channel 9 News what's going to come out of it, and the Treasury documents have already been written about what's going to come out of it, what exactly are they planning other than what they already know is going to come out of it? Leith Van Onselen is, of course, the chief economist with a wonderful website. I want you to go and bookmark this one too, which is Macro Business. The detail, I love the detail, right? For just the bogan running along like me, I learn every time I have a look at this stuff, Leith. I really appreciate it. And you, like me, a little sceptical of just how much is going to come out of this thing this week.
Yeah, 100%, Paul. I think this is going to be a complete farce and a waste of time, like most of these things. And the fundamental reason that it's going to be a waste of time is that the federal government is not going to address the two key challenges that it has with productivity. And the first one of that is one of the key reasons why Australia's productivity stinks and its living standards have been in decline is because we've grown our population so aggressively via mass immigration. So Australia's population has grown by 8.7 million people so far this century. That's a 46% increase.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fastest growth in the advanced world. And this rapid population growth has meant that we haven't been able to provide all the millions of extra workers with extra tools, machinery, and technology. We haven't provided all the millions of extra people extra families we've had with enough homes. And we obviously haven't had enough infrastructure for the 8.7 million extra people who've mostly landed in the big cities. So as a result, Paul, everyone's standard of living has gone down, not up. And Australia's productivity has been harmed because the amount of capital investment per person has actually shrunk. So Australia's actually the worst of both worlds, Paul.
Oh, I don't know why we've...
Investment.
Sorry, mate, we just had a little fade in your microphone there. But again, everyone can see there pretty obviously the green line. That is about the immigration rate, the red line, the labour productivity, and the real GDP per capita. While we keep that up for people to be able to have a look at, Leith, here, and again, we only list maybe 1.5 seconds of what you just said there. Economic reform, all right? I notice in one opinion poll, 50% of people fully back economic reform. Is economic reform a little bit of sort of all things to all people? So for the union, economic reform is work less, pay more. For big business, economic reform is bugger all taxes and easier to sack people?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's whatever you want it to be, I guess, to meet the goal that you want. But what it really should be about is boosting the nation's productivity and living standards. And the way you boost productivity is you've got to lift the amount of output per hour of work. And you certainly don't do it by fire hosing in, millions of extra people every decade into our major cities, which dilutes your capital base, makes you less productive, and obviously makes your living standards worse because we can't build enough houses for all these people. We can't provide enough infrastructure. And we just end up more crush loaded with a lower standard of living. And that's unfortunately what Australia's done as we've grown by 8.7 million people this century, the fastest growth in the advanced world.
But also, I'm sure, like me, or maybe it is just me, I've got whiplash from the different sort of daily messages being thrown at the board about the expectation of this week, right? Which is everything's on the table except everything's not on the table. And then I saw the Treasurer this weekend's talking about, oh, well, government spending's on the agenda. No, it's not. The structural deficit, the decisions that mean we spend more every year despite that population growth, means we've got deficits until the year 2063. 2062 is when the Jetsons was set, Leith. That's how far into the future. Bubble cars is how bad we are looking at a deficit. There'll be no chat about that this week.
Yeah, and certainly the flip side of that, Paul, is that the states are facing even bigger budget deficits than the federal government. And why that's a problem is the federal government runs this high immigration program because it collects 80% of the nation's tax revenue. So it just sees more people means more income taxes. The problem with it is, Paul, is that the costs of those extra millions of people then falls on the states, who then go into massive debt trying to build infrastructure. They've got to sell all the assets off, and they're just drowning in debt. And the risk is that the state governments are all downgraded, and then that'll actually downgrade the federal budget, because the federal budget's seen by the ratings agencies as the guarantor of the states. And then the banks get downgraded in Australia, then we all pay higher mortgages as well. So, this is just an absolute economic disaster. And then we have the energy disaster as well on top of that.
So, Leith, I mean, look, we'll save it for another time, and I'll save an entire hour for you to answer this question, right? Which is, so how did the normal view that we're having, right, which is about you've got to do this, you've got to do that, get supplanted with whatever this wonky version of things is. How did we get there? Is it just modern monetary theory, which basically was rack up the credit card, it'll never get called in, just became easier because, eating lettuce is less fun than ice cream?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a great question and one very hard to answer. I'd actually put a lot of the blame on unfortunately, the Australian Treasury. Like, mate, the Australian Treasury basically instructs the government to set policy for what's good for the federal budget. And I'm harkening back to it. But the federal Treasury loves high immigration because it boosts the federal budget. But then it creates all these problems everywhere else across the economy, which nobody seems to consider. And that is part of the problem. Our entire economic architecture in this country, which emanates from public institutions and our policymakers and et cetera, is just warped. And as a result, we get warped results.
That sound you can hear, mate. Standing ovations in living rooms right around the map. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's have a longer one in the future. Congrats on the site, mate. It is spectacular. Thank you, Leith Van Onselen. All the best, mate.